Well, hello, everyone. It's September. Anush and I hope that you've all had a good summer and some nice vacations. And welcome back to BRI Dialogues and to our new season. Today, we're very excited because we have Professor Chuchu Zhang. Chuchu is an associate professor of international relations at School of International Relations and Public Affairs at Fudan University. Also a deputy director of the Center of Middle Eastern Studies at Fudan University. She received her PhD in politics and international studies from University of Cambridge in United Kingdom. And her expertise is Middle East, what we these days call more often West Asia. And her focus is in and around Sino-Middle Eastern relations. And as you all know, the region is at the center of everything that is happening in the world today. So Chuchu, welcome to BRI Dialogues.
Thank you for having me, and so nice meeting you both, Ali and Anush.
I like to kick off by asking you a question to set the scene. For me, Middle East is like the L4, L5 at the lower back in the body. Every time there is a bit of a disc or a problem, the entire world starts feeling the pinch and the hurt. Traditionally, United States has approached Middle East with surgical interventions, operations. Is China developing a new method of engagement in light of the détente between Iran and Saudi Arabia, and in a post-October 7th world that we live in? Is China trying to be a physiotherapist rather than a surgeon? And can the region deal with this finesse and have the elasticity to respond to a new diplomatic engagement from China in the West Asia?
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you so much, Ali and Anush, and hello, everyone. So first of all, actually, the first question is a little bit tough, and actually we can say a lot of things about it. But first of all, I totally agree with you because exactly the Middle East is very important, and absolutely China has understood that. And that is why you see recently there are so many high-level exchanges between China and the region. And also, if you look at China's news reports, you will find that the Middle East has gained a lot of attention. And just an example, for instance, it's very interesting if you look at the news report and news coverage, you will find that. So just to make a guess about what are the most popular events right now in China, or I would say, which news are gain a lot of popular attention in China? Actually, the top three is, first of all, US election. The second one is Russia-Ukraine war, and the third is Palestine-Israel conflict. Well, actually, for the first two things, that is not very surprising because, of course, since China has a very tricky relations with the United States, and since it's a competition between two big powers in the world, then of course China is very concerned with what's going on in the United States. And Russia, it is our neighbor, so of course there is a war, then it has a great impact on China itself. But Palestine and Israel is far away from China. Then why is that today? It's not just the Chinese government, but also, the Chinese populace is also very interested in what's going on in the region. And why is that? Because as you mentioned, yes, it's in the center. It means that when there is a problem there, then it has a spillover effect everywhere. So, for instance, the Middle East is situated in the middle parts, geographically speaking, in the Eurasia. And let's see, China has proposed the Belt and Road Initiative. And if we look at the map, the Middle East is right at the heart of it. So we have the land route, we have the sea route, but wherever you go, you have to go through the Middle East. So that is very important, of course. And let's see what's going on with Palestine-Israel. Well, the spillover effect, especially the Red Sea crisis, actually it has a greater impact for China's economy, right, than the Palestine-Israel conflict itself. So of course, China has to pay attention to it. And I would say in the meantime, the Middle East is very important. Maybe we can discuss about that point later. But just to be specific, just to be, to make it simple, is that the Middle East is very important if we talk about energy, geopolitics, because China is a country that is a rising economy. But right now, a big challenge is that China itself does not have a big reserve of oil and gas. So that is why we need to import a lot of them. So China is trying to diversify suppliers. Then the Middle East, of course, is one of our biggest concern. But at the same time, when we look at our picture of the new energy, so China perceives itself as a new actor that is going to play a prominent role in the new energy era. But actually, at the same time, the Middle East thinks the same way, although we approach the same thing with different methods. So right now, that is why China believes that if we need to develop new energy, then of course the Middle East is part of it. So that means that no matter whether you talk about the traditional energy geopolitics or new energy geopolitics, you have to deal with the Middle East. It's like one of the focuses. And so right now, regarding the engagement part, I would say that yes, that is very important. But I would say that China has a very different understandings about the region. So first of all, when we talk about what methods China is going to take, I think before that, I would say China's understanding of issues, especially about its own relations to the Middle East, is very different from the traditional powers. Because first of all, China. So actually, there are a lot of differences. So first of all, you mentioned that if China wants to solve the problem for the Middle East, but for China, according to China's ancient philosophy, China does not believe that if the person itself that has a problem, if he doesn't want to solve his own problem, it's impossible for the external powers to just intervene and solve the problem for him. So according to, for instance, the Chinese ancient philosophy is that, okay, when a person has a problem, so you can come and you can propose maybe your experience, maybe your suggestions, or maybe you can act as a supporter. So we work together. And at the same time, it's not that you are going to dominate the whole process for the solution, but instead, maybe we can welcome like a lot of partners to work on the same thing, to just make some contribution. But we have to make sure that we are not getting things worse. So that is the first understanding that may be a little bit different from the traditional power. And actually, there is a second difference that is, according to China, so, for instance, when we talk about the Middle East, why are there so many problems and conflicts? Because a lot of people are saying there is sectarianism. Of course, there are other reasons, but that is one of the most important reasons. But for China, the Chinese believe that there does not have to be sectarian conflicts. So I think the logic is very interesting, because a lot of people are criticizing China and saying that, okay, you want to play a bigger role, but at the same time, you don't want to, get too much involved and take so many like responsibilities or whatever. But does it work? And we always believe that maybe China has to take sides along with its increasing engagement in the region. But China believes that it has a different logic. It thinks that maybe in the past, it's like at the very beginning, there may not be a sectarian conflict as it is today. So it doesn't have to be. So there doesn't have to be sectarian conflicts, but instead, actually, maybe there are opportunities for us to work together. So why don't we just find some common places and work together instead of just focusing on those conflicts and taking side? Because China says that it doesn't believe that it's going to make any help. So these are the approaches that are different, and I think the mindset is different. And starting from there, China has designed, I think, the completely different approach to the region.
Chuchu, that's the clearest and most interesting and complete analysis or commentary on China's worldview that I've heard. So that was absolutely brilliant explanation of where China comes from in terms of its approaches. Two questions arise from that. One is how does China convey its mindset to its partners and adversaries or potential adversaries in the region that, as you say, is so vital to its interests? And one example of that, of course, is the damage that the Ansar Allah, the Houthis, namely, are causing to maritime traffic across the Red Sea, where you see that there is, again, NATO countries that are taking the lead, while it is China's direct interests that are being threatened. How does China balance this kind of not hands-off, but peaceful engagement with potential partners and others, while its interests are being threatened very directly by local actors?
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you so much for your question. Regarding the Houthi rebels, I think it's a very interesting point. Maybe I can make several comments from my own understanding. First of all, I think that when people talk about China, especially its relations with the Middle East, sometimes there are a lot of exaggeration about China's capacity. And one of the misunderstanding is that China is capable of doing everything it wants or whatever. But first of all, the most important thing I would say is China is a newcomer and it's a latecomer in the Middle East. While yes, there are actually a lot of interactions since very early in the history, but actually very concrete or very frequent exchanges. Actually, it happened very recently, especially the relations beyond the economic cooperation. So right now, I think what China is doing is that it's trying to learn how it is going to deal with the region. Okay, and now it faces several challenges, and the first is it's trying to learn to deal with all those very complicated actors in the region, because originally you may know that China has a foreign policy principle that is more interested in dealing with official actors. So China has been focusing on state-to-state and government-to-government relations. Well, there are many reasons for that, but one logic is that if we need to talk to each other, I'm a group, you are a group, we have a lot of people, but you also have a lot of group people. So we have one representative and you have one representative. It's not that, I am going to talk with a lot of people and we come different agreements, and in the end, we don't know which one is the real thing. But instead, China is saying to make things easier and clear, so we each have one representative, so we focus on this government-to-government cooperation, which can make things easier. And also we have the non-interference policy. So it means that China is not going to intervene with the internal politics of the other country. So it's not going to, for instance, support proxies or work with non-state actors in other countries to, for instance, overthrow the other regime. So that is not China's, policy. So in the past, there is this kind of logic in mindset China didn't. So China focused more on working with the state actors in the Middle East. But actually, the Middle East is very complicated, especially after the Arab awakening. So right now, for instance, in Yemen and Libya, in these places, there are so many actors and it's very complicated. So right now, I think China it does not know a lot about Houthi rebels. And there were not many fundamental relationship between China, Houthi rebels or Hamas or these kind of groups. So China has now learned to deal with. So it's still in a learning process. That is why it's very cautious. And the second issue is that we also have to take in mind that as a newcomer, China is also learning and is trying to figure out to what extent it can act. Because although it's sort of a power, it's not that China can do everything in the region. For instance, first of all, it has to consider to what extent is it allowed to act. So for instance, there is a superpower, which is the United States. And I would say, for instance, a lot of people like to make a comparison between China's role in Iran, Saudi Arabia, and China's role in Palestine-Israel conflict. But from my own viewpoint, it's completely different things. Because in Saudi Arabia, Iran is much easier because first of all, there are two states, right? So China is used to state-to-state negotiation. But the second issue is that Iran and Saudi Arabia, right? So when they exchange ideas or negotiate with China, it's easier. But when it comes to Israel, it's more complicated because actually the United States has a bigger role in the issue, and actually United States always considers Israel as its core interest. So that makes things more complicated. So it's not that China can do whatever it wants. So it's more complicated. And the third issue is that China also need to learn, is trying to figure out the extent it is allowed to act from the perspective of regional actors, because as we talked about before, so right now the challenge for China is that it has to work with so many actors in the region, and it doesn't want to displease any side, because for China the most important interest is the economic interest. That is the first thing. So if you want to do business, you want to be friends with all of them, right? But the second issue is that when you talk about the broader vision of the Belt and Road Initiative, the Middle East is right at the center. So it means that it's very important for the security of the whole trade route. So it means that if you displease one side, even one actor, even like Houthi rebels, it's a non-state actor, but it's going to affect the trade route. So that is also going to be a big problem, right? So for China, I think it's still trying to understand, the extent it can work. And especially when it comes to the Houthi rebels, it's very complicated because first of all, that in Yemen, we often say it's a proxy war. So there are lots of non-state actors, but behind all of them, there are big powers and regional powers, right? And China are friends with all of these regional, states. So it's very difficult for it to take side. And also, I think it's not just China. For instance, Saudi Arabia's position on the issue is also very, tricky, or I would say very difficult, or very complex, because actually when the Houthi rebels, they start their first actions in the Red Sea, actually Saudi Arabia, they did not, condemn them a lot and take a lot of actions, even though Saudi Arabia supports the other groups in Yemen. So China knows that even for the regional actors, it's a complicated thing. So China says that, okay, how about we just take a look first and then learn to deal with the regional actors and learn what we can do, and then think about taking action. But of course, I would say that China always condemns, the Red Sea crisis, because China thinks that the security of its trade route is one of the most important issues. So it has actually made a lot of criticism on that case.
Chuchu, very interesting. And while you were sharing your insights with us, it brought to my attention that even having a military power as well hasn't been able to abate the Houthi attack. So United States, because China is doomed if it acts and doomed if it doesn't act through the eyes of the world. Oh, China is here to dominate. Oh, China is not present and not doing anything. So it's a lose-lose for this early stage of diplomacy and China's interventions. But as you rightly said, it takes two to tango. There is this old expression that how many shrinks does it take to change a light bulb? Only one if the light bulb wants to change. So my question is that how much of political or strategic autonomy and agency do you see as a Middle East expert among the Middle Eastern actors in engaging with China? So the strategic autonomy in Europe is a foregone conclusion. We know that Europe takes a lot of its directives from United States, okay? But is there a growing strategic autonomy in GCC and in West Asia, despite all of these crises, that they say, yes, we would like to be closer to China in collaboration, in investment, in partnerships in Africa, in geopolitics? Or do you see that still as well very feeble and very thin?
Yeah, oh, very interesting question, because actually that is again a very complicated issue. And in China, there are a lot of debates. For instance, if you go over the media coverage or the comments of scholars, for instance, I would say that basically there are two perspectives. The one perspective is saying that, okay, they are saying that GCC countries and many like countries in the so-called global South, they want to get more autonomy. So they want maybe to say goodbye to the Western world, or they just want to have more of their sovereignty. They have more decision making of their own. So that is why they are coming to embrace China. And the second, the second perspective is completely different. They are saying, and that is a very interesting saying, because people are saying that actually Saudi Arabia and many GCC countries, they want to develop a good relationship with China because they want to develop a better relationship with the United States. So instead, they're saying that these actors, they want to use China as a hedging tool. So it means that the purpose is not to deal with China itself, but to just having a hedge tool and say to the United States, okay, you don't give me that, okay, I will come to China. But if you give it to me, okay, I'll take China out. So these are two perspectives. But from my own standpoint, I think it's not that, these are oversimplified views. But from my own understanding, I think I look at the issue from a broader perspective. So first of all, I would say when we talk about looking east, I think is the east doesn't mean China. Actually, when we say the Middle Eastern countries, they are looking east, the east can mean a lot of things. And actually, they are dealing with a lot of countries. I think it's not just about China, but for instance, India, it has been playing a bigger role, and also South Korea, Japan, and even Singapore, for instance, and even Southeast Asia. So actually, because the Middle East, it has a lot of considerations and calculus for themselves. They want to diversify their relations. They find a lot of opportunities in the East, and also they want to redefine their identity. So to engage more with the so-called Asia, right, the Asian identity. And also, a very interesting thing is that the Middle Eastern countries, a lot of them, although, for instance, Qatar or the United Arab Emirates, they have very limited, territory or population. Actually, they are becoming, very influential. So they are actually, you can say or define them as Middle middle powers. Actually, they have some kind of influence like that, and they are not just satisfied of being active regional actors, but they want to go beyond the Middle East, and the starting point is the East. So that is what's going on. So it's not just about China. So I don't think it's like a competition between China and the US in the region. And the second issue is that I think actually, right now, the regional geopolitics has entered a stage that a lot of actors and stakeholders, they intend the same thing, that is to have a more diversified, geopolitics in the region. So actually, for China, for instance, actually, I have published a paper about that early this year. But actually, I'd say, so for instance, China, India, South Korea, these actors, of course, there are a lot of problems, right, on other issues like territorial disputes. But regarding the Middle East, I would say there are not many, very negative competitions, because actually, first of all, these actors, they all know their own limitation. For instance, China, South Korea, India, right? So they know that they're not going to be a dominator or to just to project their hegemonic power in the region. They don't have the intentional capacity. And secondly, they are very satisfied to just play a limited role, but to to have more engagement with the region and also to do their own business. But of course, there are a lot of competition in the market. But I would say that is a very normal issue, and also they want to have to provide more options for the regional actions. And I think the region is the same thing. The regional actors, I think they have very clear strategy, that is to diversify their partners. So yes, they have the autonomy, but how do they gain the autonomy? So they want to project, I mean, the regional actors, for instance, the GCC countries or Egypt or Iran. So these countries, they want to project their own influence, and also at the same time they want to diversify their partners as many as possible. So in that sense, they can have more choices and more flexibility. And I often say that, for instance, to let more newcomers engage with the region. It's not that, for instance, the regional actors have to choose between China, India, or the United States, but instead it's like, okay, I can have McDonald's in the morning, but I have KFC for dinner, but tomorrow I have Pizza Hut. It's like that. So it's not a zero-sum game. And I think the third issue, what I think is that in the future, so for the regional powers, I think they will not, we should not just perceive them as passive actors. So it's not that, okay, there are competitions between China, United States, India, whatever, okay, and the regional actors, they are going to feel the impact. But instead, actually, when there are a lot of players in the region, and when the picture becomes very complicated, actually, the regional actors, they have an advantage because they have the feeling that they are the real dominator, and they are actually actively, negotiate with different partners, bargaining with all of these big powers and to maximize their own interests. And so actually, they are actively shape the regional order instead of just being passive actors.
Absolutely spot on, Chuchu. So if we unpack that a little bit, there seem to be two very interesting currents going on. One is that regional actors join BRICS Plus, for example, and the latest is that Turkey has now expressed interest to join BRICS Plus as well. And many people see that as a kind of Sino-Russian axis. And also the other one, of course, is Shanghai Cooperation Organization, where China is clearly the main actor in terms of the agenda setting. Organization is based in Shanghai and so on. So regional actors are coalescing around these new bodies that China has a very important role to play in. And then there is one country that stands out, and that's Iran. The GCC has good relations with the West. Turkey is a member of NATO. They have extensive partnerships. And in the West now, it's become very common kind of phrase to bungle China, North Korea, Iran, and Russia together as this new so-called axis of evil. And while people discount North Korea completely, Iran becomes very interesting player in here, because the new president is in power precisely because he wants to rebuild relations with the West, because he knows that the sanctions have to be lifted. And yet it is portrayed as part of this axis of evil, that behind the scenes, Moscow and Beijing are manipulating developments. So how do you see China reacting to the ways in which the Iranian-Russian military partnership is developing? And secondly, how does China see this basically change of tone from Tehran? Late President Raisi was a very close friend of China, irrespective of China's closeness to Saudi Arabia. That annoyed them a little bit, but he was adamant that he would remain close to China. Now we have a new person, a reformist, interested in dealing with America directly and so on. These forces don't seem to line up directly. How do you see from China's perspective these forces at play?
Right. Thank you so much. So first of all, if we talk, okay, so maybe I can start from the second question and then I come to the first question. So when we talk about the new president of Iran, I think that's a very interesting point. I would say that right now the picture is very complicated because, okay, so for Iran itself, so first of all, China is observing what is going on. Of course, people are saying that maybe there is a change because there is a new president and who is a reformer. But at the same time, we should also keep in mind that he's not the first, the highest decision maker because Khamenei is there. So basically, the policy may be consistent. So there may not be a fundamental change. Since there is still the biggest decision maker. And the second issue is that I would say that the nuclear, the new nuclear negotiation, negotiation may be a long-term issue because right now there is still the presidential election in the United States and nobody knows who is going to be the new president of the United States. And I would say that maybe if Harris become the new president, then there is a greater chance for this new negotiation. But if Trump becomes president, then maybe it can be worse than before. So it may be very difficult. So right now it's still very hard to say. And also, if Harris becomes president, then a lot of things may change. And also the new nuclear negotiation. Yeah, of course, I think China welcomes all the things that can contribute to the peace and stability in the Middle East. And most important reason is that because China wants to promote its Belt and Road Initiative, its first priority in the Middle East is energy, its economic interest. So of course, a peaceful and stable Middle East is in China's interest, and that is why it has tried to negotiate the Iran-Saudi Arabia reconciliation. So in that sense, and also we have also to keep in mind that the JCPOA in the past, so the previous nuclear, Iranian nuclear negotiation, actually China had a lot of engagement with that. So I think China welcomes that. But at the same time, I would say there are still a lot of difficulties and challenges because the most important thing about this issue is that there lacks trust between the United States and Iran. So who is to make the first compromise? And also, if there is a new deal, then it's completely different from the previous one. So maybe there are more conditions. And so there are a lot of, disputes. So that is what's going on. And right now, it's going to be a little bit difficult because there are still the Palestine-Israel conflict. So that makes things even more complicated. And regarding, the SCO or BRICS, so first of all, when these countries they show their interest in these kind of organizations, I would not say that it's just because they are interested in China, because actually they are not just China's club or China's group, because we will find that in both SCO and BRICS, there are many partners, and China is just only one member. Maybe it has some influence, but also there is Russia. And it's not that, okay, Russia and China, they have, very similar views on everything. It's not like that. Each country has their own strategy and own interests. And also there is India, right? So, and there are a lot of difference between India and China, and each country, they have their own, their own approach. So actually, I would say that they are global South organizations. So the regional actors, again, since they want to pursue their autonomy and they want to have more bargaining tools, so that is why they are actively trying to be part of a lot of mechanism and organizations in the world, and that is why they want to be part of it. But obviously, it's not that, okay, they just join the Global South organizations and they leave the other ones. It's not, because, for instance, Turkey is very interesting because it wants to be part of the BRICS, but also it wants to remain in the NATO, for instance, and it has always been pursuing the objective of being part of the EU. So it's want to have engagement in everything, right? And at the same time, the UAE is the same. It wants to be part of a lot of organizations. So that's just their strategy. And I would say that there are actually other, strategies and objectives for the regional actors, because the first thing is they want to be as far as many organizations so as to gain more, bargaining advantages. But secondly, I think they also want to gain more influence. And that is a very effective way. So I think one thing that is very interesting is that you will find there are a lot of very similar mindsets between China and the Middle Eastern states. While of course we have very different ideological thinking, and the belief systems are completely different, but there are some logic and mindsets that are very similar. For instance, for Chinese, government, it wants to do something that can yield instant, immediate results. So, for instance, when we talk about the Red Sea crisis or a lot of things, for instance, Palestine-Israel conflict, one challenge is that if you don't know, this is going to happen or this is going to work, then you don't say it, because otherwise it's a shame. It's not like the United States, because the system is different. So it's like, even if I don't have any achievement at the very beginning, I say it and I make it a big label. So it's completely different strategy. And for the Middle Eastern countries, when they pursue the middle power status, they also want to have some achievements that they can show to their domestic and international audience. See, we achieved something. And to be part of these kind of organizations is a very effective and very immediate way for them to achieve these goals. So you can always say, wow, okay, I am part of the SCO or BRICS, etc. But I think different countries have very different goals. For instance, for Iran, it's different because it's very unique, and actually right now it faces a lot of restrictions and sanctions. And for Iran, it doesn't want to be excluded, right? Because right now, for its own domestic economy, it needs to stay in the globalization, in the global economic system, and also it doesn't want to be isolated from the international stage. So that is why it is very actively in taking part in, for instance, the SCO or BRICS, etc. I think, but from China's perspective, I think so China has proposed a lot of things, for instance, the Belt and Road Initiative and a lot of other initiatives, and it's actively promoting BRICS or SCOs. But I think one important purpose is that China believes that if you exclude a state actor, then maybe you can see a worse disaster, because when a state actor is marginalized, then the results may be even worse. So why don't you just include it, right? So give it like an opportunity to be part of a system. So, and also we can think about why there is a European Union. It's because at the very beginning, France and Germany, they have a lot of problems and disputes, but then they decide to strengthen the interdependency between each other. And now China has this very similar mindset and is saying, so if you just exclude Iran, then the regional geopolitics can be worse. So why don't, if it is interested itself, so why don't you, as a extra regional power, you just provide more platforms to engage different parties together?
Chuchu, we talk a lot about these clubs, these memberships, these agendas. And we have, Quad for India, we have I2U2 for India. But about a few weeks ago, Iran and India signed the development of Chabahar port, and United States came out blazing saying, hey, we will sanction you, India. So do you think that with this, even with a partner like India, that receives such a harsh message from United States, being an integral part of Quad and I2U2, and in Indo-Pacific being the counterweight to China, if you will, through the United States eyes. Is that something that will bring New Delhi undercurrents closer to the club of more tightening that club, you know, or as a BRICS Plus and as SCO? Because this rivalry between New Delhi and Beijing has been always there. But when India or the foreign minister, who's very charismatic and very outspoken, hears a message like that, does that bring him closer? And in the same light, do we see the asset allocations of SABIC investing in, you know, China, BASF opening a 10 billion euro plant in China? All of this needs markets, and all of this has to go back to Africa with 2 billion population, to India, larger population than China now. Do we see, as a result of this Damocles sword over even India's head, a more cohesion in BRICS and SCO in months to come, or not?
Okay, so regarding the relations between China and India, I would say that so the two countries, as you mentioned, have a lot of other concerns and strategic problems. So yes, of course, they have some like competition in Iran or Chabahar port, but I don't think that is the first priority that determine the relations between China and India, because actually the two countries have a lot of other things to worry about, and they have a lot of other disputes that are very hard to negotiate, because there are the territorial disputes, for instance, and also right now it's like the two countries are having the regional competition, for instance. For instance, there is also the Indo-Pacific strategy, which is promoted also by India and United States. So it's very complicated. So right now, I don't think that the Middle East is the most important competition arena between China and India. That is the first issue. And the second issue, yes, regarding in India, actually India has a very similar economic pattern to China. And actually, I'd say all these Asian powers are very similar, because we are all like export oriented economy, like China, South Korea, Japan, India, and also all these Asian companies in the east side, they lack and they need energy, and that is why they all have very similar concerns with the Middle East, and they all want to develop better and deeper relationship with the region. So that is why. But right now, regarding if we just forget about China but talk about India and the region, we will find that there are a lot of big and broad initiative proposed by India, such as IMEC, for instance, is a big promoter, and also the Chabahar port. But right now, there are still a lot of difficulties. And I would say the first one is, where does the money come from? Because when you have these broad visions, then someone is going to pay for it. Regarding IMEC, for instance, so India, expect that the Gulf countries are going to pay for it, but the Gulf countries, they already have a lot of construction plans, especially under their visions, like Saudi vision, like the Qatari vision. I mean, these kind of things. So it means that there are still disputes regarding the financial issue, but regarding Iran, it's going to be more difficult, because Iran is right now under a very serious economic difficulty. So there is going to be that problem. And the second issue is efficiency. So if you have a big plan, then where is it? When is it going to be realized? And also, there is also, so if you want to construct all those ports and those infrastructure, then it takes time. So I would say it's a long-term vision, but maybe we cannot see a lot of achievements just right now under the ground, But the third thing is that I would find some very interesting finding from my own observation and research, and that is actually China and India. So these two countries have a lot of disputes, especially on the other issues. But regarding the Middle East, actually both countries are approaching the place by adopting very similar approach. So because, for instance, China wants to become a balancer in the region, right? It doesn't want to take sides. And actually, India is doing completely the same thing. And second, China wants to be friends with everybody, and India is the same. And also, China has adopted a non-interference strategy, and people have different comments on that. But actually, you will find India is doing the same thing. It even says in its, for instance, Modi's discourse, and he has stressed non-interference a lot of times. So it means that actually the two powers, they have a lot of differences, but they are approaching the region in the same way. So, but of course, if you talk about the market, about economic relations, since China and India has very similar economic structure, so right now of course, there are going to be some competitions in the market, but I would say it's more like market-driven competition than like a strategic competition that is decided by the governments.
Thank you, Chuchu. We normally bring our sessions, we could go on for hours, and particularly with everything that is happening in Middle East or West Asia, as I like to call it these days. But I normally bring our sessions to end with 2 standard questions. But before asking you that questions, I remember you talked about Burger King and McDonald's, why you should choose between one or two. I think the choice is becoming more between chicken masala and Beijing duck. So there are new players and new food options out there, not just McDonald's or Burger King. But Chuchu, if you were to leave our audience and the 2 camps of cinephobes and cinephiles, each of those camps with one piece of advice, what would be your advice to the cinephobes and what would be your advice to the cinephiles, briefly?
That is a very difficult question. So for the sinophones, I would say that I think maybe we should strengthen our mutual understanding. So maybe we need to know more about each other before making immediate comments, because actually sometimes when even if we criticize each other, maybe we have a lot of common grounds actually, just that we didn't realize it. And as for the sinophiles, I say that maybe we can find more opportunity to work together and to develop together. I mean, why not?
And Chuchu, that's exactly where BRI Dialogues comes in, because it is all about facilitating dialogue and communications and enlightenment, which is what you've been able to do for us today with your wonderful insights, and also the clarity of your analysis is wonderful. I think University of Fudan is very lucky to have you, and given your British connections, I very much hope that we'll see you in the UK amongst us, so that we can share your wisdom much more widely here, as well as with our audiences. So Ali and I are really grateful to you for having accepted our invitation to come on. We would like you to come again, because this region is not going away anytime soon, and the crises in it are not going to be resolved anytime soon either. And it's wonderful to have your wise head to reflect on what China's interesting collaborative initiatives can bring in terms of returning peace and tranquility and prosperity to a region which has been suffering for over 200 years. So we are really grateful to you, Chuchu, for joining us and for being so candid and open and insightful in your commentary. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Chuchu.
Thank you, Ali and Anush. Thank you.